The week of the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix, McLaren Racing CEO Zach Brown wrote an open letter to IndyCar looking ahead to the future and making some suggestions that he thought would move the sport forward. The minute I saw it, and of course I read it immediately, I found some things that I very much agreed with and some things I very much disagree with. But one thing was for certain, I knew that I had to discuss this letter in depth, and I knew that it would require its own video to do just that. So this is quite an interesting move from Zach Brown of McLaren because supposedly he was supposed to be one of the advisors to IndyCar about what they should and should not be doing in the future. So I think it's interesting that a public letter makes its way out this way through specifically the McLaren website. You don't typically do these sorts of things unless you feel you're not being heard. And there's a couple of instances within this letter where there are some direct references made to quotes that we are very well aware of being made recently by certain higher ups in IndyCar. Their initials might start with MM. So definitely interesting timing of this letter. But I also think that this letter is important to listen to because, has McLaren's tenure in IndyCar been 100% positive for the sport? No. But what I will say is that, and I've said this several times before, where would IndyCar racing be on the promotional marketing side, the interest level in the sport, the twists and turns of the sport, the global reach of IndyCar racing as it continues into the 2020s without McLaren? Because, and I even think about this for myself a lot of the times. Would I really have an IndyCar-centric YouTube channel if not for the dramatic rise of IndyCar into the internet consciousness around 2017 when Fernando Alonso made his Indy 500 debut? Would there be that market, specifically with young people, if not for McLaren? So I think the sport owes them a lot, and it owes Zach Brown a lot. So his ideas and his thoughts are super important because he gets it, I think. So let's take a look at this letter, I'd say. Before we get to that, Wednesday, DL 500 Club, link in the description, Patreon. IMSA this weekend. I'll be having coverage from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway of the Battle on the Bricks, 6-hour race. And yes, it is odd to start a video without saying the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix, but thanks to their sponsorship over the last few weeks, and hopefully we'll be able to run it back in 2025. All right, let's get to it. Oh yeah, also, Callum Ilott just signed officially with Prema Racing for next year. We still don't know 100% who the second seat is, although it sounds like it's going to be Robert Schwartzman. And Felix Rosenqvist re-signed with Meyer Shank Racing for the next couple of years. All right. McLaren Racing CEO Zach Brown has penned a letter ahead of IndyCar season finale. So we're going to cut some of the fluff out. We're going to just try to focus on the meat and potatoes of this. And right away, Zach Brown talks about next year's schedule, featuring 17 rounds, 7 road courses, 4 street circuits, and 6 ovals. By the way, in my opinion, the ovals should be split as well. You should talk about super speedways and short ovals. You shouldn't just lump all the ovals together. That would be like lumping all of the tracks with left and right hand turns together, but oh well, that's semantics. But he talks about future calendar improvements, specifically the fact that Nashville would take place on Labor Day weekend next year, which I think is good. And for the reason Zach Brown states, it avoids clashing with the start of the NFL season. If you think about Nashville this year, it went directly up against the Titans home game. The crowd, I thought, was fantastic at Nashville considering that difficulty. And you looked at how great the crowd was at Milwaukee. I think that will help Nashville significantly. But to Zach's point, it condenses the championship into just 6 months. So it's a very quick point, and he doesn't really elaborate on how to fix that problem. But to me, I look at that 6 months and you're not. The idea has always been to avoid the NFL, right? I totally understand that. I don't think Mark Miles, who that was his idea initially, is totally wrong for doing that. Where I think the shortfall has always been is that, to me, IndyCar racing, if it doesn't start the week after the Super Bowl, has got to start the week after the Daytona 500. And now that you have a broadcast partner with Fox who has the Daytona 500, I think you have to be more aggressive about getting more races front-loaded into the season. To me, I think the Indy 500 should be at or around the midway point of the season. The Indy 500 should be the halfway break where you have the first half of the season kind of lead up to Indy, and then the second half of the season leads up to the championship finale. That's how I think about it. But Zach brings up a couple of ideas for specific markets that he would like to see IndyCar racing in, specifically the East Coast and in major metro markets. And the one that he mentioned specifically is Denver, which he says is a long time coming. Now, I think it needs to be said that Arrow, which is the primary partner of Arrow McLaren, is based in Denver. So Zach is making a very, astute political move by angling for a Denver race. Do I necessarily want to see more street courses? I mean, although what did Zach say? It's 7 or it's only 4 street courses. Feels like there's more street courses on the schedule than there are. Perhaps that's a bit of a sign about what street courses feel like. But do I really want a street course in downtown Denver? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say no. And I think it's a market that IndyCar is not in. They have been in the past. But to me, street courses recently have not had nearly enough thought put into them. They have to be good racetracks first, because you look at the street courses that stick around. You look at St. Pete. What does it look like? It looks like a real racetrack. Long Beach. What does it look like? It looks like a real racetrack. Toronto. It's moving further and further away from being a real racetrack, but it still has many of the roots of the 1980s when it was a great street track. So, if you do a street course in Denver, Dallas, or wherever, to me, you have to make sure that it is a real raceable racetrack that just happens to be taking place in a city. No gimmicks, no nonsense pit lanes that just look stupid, no too narrow, don't try to make it a crash fest, a real racetrack. That's the key to success with a street course. And then mentions the absence of Watkins Glen, which dropped off the calendar a number of years ago and continues to leave a noticeable gap in the Northeast, which we aim to fill. Yes, the Watkins Glen thing, a few key figures in IndyCar have made reference to Watkins Glen in the past couple of weeks, and they're all definitely shots taken at the quote of Mark Miles. I don't necessarily think Watkins Glen is like the perfect Northeast venue. I think with some safety improvements, why not go back to Pocono? I think you need to raise the walls in turn 2. I think you need to make sure that the track has the ability to replace catch fencing if need be to the standard of IndyCar racing. But why not Pocono? A 500-mile race. I think there needs to be a second 500-mile race on the calendar somewhere. So why not? But I've been kind of had my ear pulled a couple of times by Jake, aka GP Laps, to talk about, and also Cale Putnam, to talk about Loudon. And yes, 100%, Loudon, New Hampshire would race exactly like Milwaukee, especially if you brought the Milwaukee tire there. And if you look at the crowd in 2011 with the threat of rain, I think we would be very happy with that crowd in 2024. So Loudon, New Hampshire would be the one I would throw my hat into the ring for in the Northeast. He also talks a bit about investing into the street courses that you do build, which I do agree with. I think it kind of goes to my point about making sure that it is a racetrack first and a street course second. So yeah, I think I'm in agreement with Zach on that one. Then we get to the Mexico issue. I mean, we've talked about this quite a bit at length. I mean, I think that both IndyCar, I'll put it this way, I think IndyCar and McLaren and everybody needs to continue to work to lift Pato up as a star. He is a star. He easily sells more merch than any other driver in IndyCar racing. But we need to find someone who, whether they be in Mexico or elsewhere, looks at Pato and says, I want to spend the money to bring IndyCar to Mexico City because Pato Award is worth that kind of money. And we haven't found that sponsor yet. So I would love to see IndyCars in Mexico City. I think it would be a success because of Pato Award, but I do understand there are some economic challenges to that. The talk about international races. Now, Mark Miles, since the beginning of his tenure at IndyCar, has dreamed of an international series. Most of the time, he will mention that it would be a non-championship race. Let's go into what Zach had to say about this. Mentions the traditional events at Motegi, which was a great event, and Surfers Paradise, which, to me, you want to talk about a gold standard street course? Surfers Paradise in Australia is a gold standard street course. It ticks every box that you want in a street course venue. I think we would be much better served by focusing on more events in large markets closer to the U.S. to enhance our foray into Canada. In the past, races we've run in Mexico and Brazil were extremely popular with fans, as they also love IndyCar racing. So with the talk about international expansion, my preference would be to remain within the continents of North and South America. I think we will see more growth in major markets closer to home. Let's focus on the Americas and not get distracted. Focusing on these regions makes much better strategic sense, building our established fan base. Completely agree with Zach Brown on this one. While it would be cool, and trust me, again, he mentions Motegi and Surfers Paradise. To me, if Surfers Paradise called IndyCar tomorrow, or Adelaide, as Mark Miles said, called IndyCar tomorrow and said, come on, we'll pay the freight, come race here, you'd be crazy not to go. But to pursue Europe and pursue Japan and pursue China and pursue Korea and pursue all of these countries that IndyCar has pursued well overseas for decades and gotten nothing done, I think is fool's gold. Stop chasing them for a little while. Let them chase you. I think Zach is completely right that, yes, IndyCar needs to focus first on fixing home soil. You can expand to Canada. You can expand to Mexico. Brazil, maybe. I don't know. Is there a Brazilian track that's really, that won't have the F1 problem? I mean, Interlagos would be great, but I don't think F1 would play very nice with IndyCar. So is there a Brazilian track that can host IndyCar? I mean, they tried-ish with Argentina. Didn't really work. I think, to me, again, you go back to Mexico. If you're going to go outside of the U.S. and it's not going to be Canada, I think Mexico is the obvious choice. But, maybe Zach didn't say this quite as strongly as I'm going to say it, but I think you need to get IndyCar insanely popular in the U.S. again and then look outside of the U.S. That's how I feel about it. And frankly, that's how I've always felt about it. Zach says, non-championship races are a distraction we could do without. With no championship points at stake, these events are merely exhibitions rather than bona fide competition and really only serve to dilute the competitive nature of the series. We should also eliminate double-header weekends, as these back-to-back races don't add much value, and reduce the exposure of the series has in a 17-race season, and don't add a lot for the fans who are on site compared to the action they are already experiencing in a standard one-way race weekend. Okay, so there's a lot to break down there. Number one, for me, non-championship races, to the point of Zach Brown, he's kind of mentioning, I believe, the international series idea. I completely agree with him on that. You should either have these races for championship points, even if it is an international, put it this way, if you're going to do an international series, call it IndyCar International and have teams racing for points and prize money and all of the stuff that they would race for in a regular IndyCar season. If you want to start a second series and make it an international formula, go and do that. But don't expect the teams in the U.S. to go race for nothing. I completely agree with that. Now, doubleheader weekends, there are two on the calendar right now. They're in Iowa and Milwaukee. Next year, the Milwaukee race is going to one race. I agree on principle, although I will say that I thought the Milwaukee weekend worked really well as a two-race deal because the racing product was so good. you felt satisfied after one race and you really felt satisfied after two. And ironically, that's the race that's not staying at two races. And ironically enough, they're taking that race and turning it into the Thermal Club points race, which, of course, Thermal Club was not a points race last year. I still stand by the fact that I think the Thermal Club should be a preseason test followed by some sort of an exhibition race like they did this year. I know I'm kind of contradicting Zach a little bit here, but to me, I think you should make preseason testing into an event. I thought that my biggest criticism of Thermal Club this year was not that it wasn't a points race, it was that it took place after the beginning of the season. That was the part that didn't make any sense to me. And I don't know if I necessarily think Thermal as a points race is the best idea either. But I do agree with the idea that Zach has here that, with the double headers, you are just padding the season. Completely agree. That's been a problem for the longest time. If you're only going to have 17 events, as, again, this is another Mark Miles edict that has been a thing since 2017, less races in a shorter time period. If you're only going to have 17 events, I think we would rather see 17 different markets, 17 different tracks. Completely agree. As to the point of it, being the same amount of action experience versus a standard race weekend, I would definitely say a points race is worth more than, say, a practice and a qualifying session. But this goes to the next point, which I completely agree with here. And I've been saying it for years on this channel, ever since I regularly started going to IndyCar races, which was around 2022. I started pointing this out. So the fact that Zach Brown pointed this particular thing out made me really go, okay, Zach gets it. The cadence of practice sessions heading into a race weekend also needs some revision. Having only one practice on Fridays of street and road courses is inefficient for teams and limits the opportunity to gather critical data and further refine their setups. Ensuring a higher level of preparation will ultimately elevate the quality of competition and the overall fan experience. 100% agree. 1,000% agree. And it was a discussion point specifically at Nashville this weekend. Nashville, the championship race, the season finale, a race that had so much riding on it, and a different formula than we've ever seen, which was the low boost with the intermediate wings, I guess we'll call them, intermediate oval wings, and alternate tires. We've never seen that combination used at a race before, particularly at a track that we haven't seen since 2008. And they only gave us one practice day, and you're supposed to try to hype up the championship race, and you have 1 day of practice. And I say that as someone who, was asked by the race to help lift it up. It's difficult for me as a content creator who specifically focuses on the racing aspect of IndyCar racing to talk about anything intelligent anyway without having racing on the racetrack. And if I'm a ticket buying, if I'm a fan, when I am a fan and I'm not going to a race to cover it, I'm going to a race to enjoy it. I prioritize races that give me multiple days of cars on track. I don't necessarily care if it's a practice session. I want to see race cars on track. Going back to David, the content creator, what are my biggest moments as an IndyCar content creator? It is the week of practice for the Indy 500. That is when my views are the highest. That's when my interaction is the highest. That's when I can help build storylines, hype up the race weekend, get everybody excited about the Indy 500. There's a reason that formula works. For me, not only do I want to see a full practice day on Friday for every racetrack, not just the road and street courses, but I think you need it on the ovals too. And some drivers are going to very much disagree with me, including Alex Palou, who said it at the bullpen this day, and a few other drivers I know are going to absolutely hate me for saying this. You know who you are. I think we should be running on Thursdays too, because at the end of the day, every day that cars are on track is more headlines that can be written, more videos that can be made, more things that can develop, more things with race cars on track that can drive eyeballs and intrigue to pay attention and watch the race on Sunday. Completely agree. Zach talks about fuel saving. We saw a few races this year where fuel saving removes the thrill of how different strategies play out. Whether it's smaller fuel tank capacity for the street courses or higher degradation on tires, there are a few ways to address this to ensure the racing stays as exciting as it's always been in the series. Tire allocation throughout a weekend should also be considered. There's a better way to balance opportunity for tire strategy with used and slicks on race day, but all forcing the teams to sit park for at the practice session to save new tires for race. Yes, I hate that. That's another problem with the Friday practice, is that they give the rookies an extra tire set, so only the rookies go out for like the first half of the session, which, you know, isn't good for the fans. It isn't good for the teams. That's bad. I also think they need to start messing with the fuel capacity at the Indianapolis 500. The Indy 500, you know, to Zach's point, he's talking about the street races here, which also are a problem with fuel saving. But to me, the Indy 500 is one of the most boring races from like lap 50 to lap 150, because the whole middle part of the race is just everybody sitting in line fuel saving. We need to change the fuel capacity, whether to add more fuel or less fuel, to try to either have the fuel tank not last an entire tire stint or last beyond a tire stint, so that you can open up some strategy options, maybe make it or incentivize teams to go hard, drive hard throughout the stint and not save fuel, because to me, your biggest race sometimes is the most boring in the middle part of it, when you need to try to retain people's attention for that sprint to the finish. I think he's cooking on that one. Talking about Fox, this is where there's a lot of glazing going on about Fox, which is fair, I guess. I mean, it is a good deal for the series. We've talked about that before. I'm a little bit worried about Fox because I'm concerned about how they're going to balance their IndyCar focus during the NFL season and how much time they're actually going to focus on creating the IndyCar product between now and then. I'm worried that they're going to focus too much on the NFL, and it might hurt the IndyCar product. It's notable that a lot of racing series have improved their coverage in recent years. And what's exciting about Fox is the potential to revolutionize how IndyCar is presented on TV, especially with such innovations as drone shots, which can follow the cars through most of the most testing sections of a circuit, or preview the track layout for fans pre-race. We should utilize more onboard cameras, such as suspension cam, foot cam, shifter cam, visor cam, and a rear wing cam that help showcase the driver's skill. Completely agree. And also, every car in the field, because F1 has now set the standard. I'm sorry, it's going to cost money, but IndyCar, you have to follow this. Every car in the field should have an onboard that can be cut to by the TV broadcast at any time. Every car in the field should have one. There's also room for more data-centric broadcasts, similar to what we see in Formula One and the NFL. Formula One and the NFL are two of the best in the business in terms of sports and in terms of showing stats and presenting them in a way that the casual viewer can understand what's going on, not necessarily to the level of an expert, but can understand it and consume it and be excited when perhaps it looks like it's boring. Sharing key data such as race strategy, predictive analytics, and information on different tire compounds and tire wear would engage the fans more of the intricacies of our sport. Maybe even a TV camera or microphone in race control would help create a more transparent decision-making process. I agree with that. More often than not, race control has played a major part in the races, and the fans and viewers should be able to listen in, where appropriate, to take the mystery out of how decisions are made. 100%. This might also be able to explain the push-to-pass usage and when it is and isn't legal to use. Shots fired. No, I completely agree with most of that right there. Not much else I can add to that. IndyCar should be engaging its fans, whether male or female, diehard enthusiast or newcomer, through the new TV partnership with Fox and its digital output. Should be appealing to fans by extruding the virtues of this amazing technology, advanced, high-speed, exciting sport. Should also be celebrating our history. Yes. For example, we should remind everyone why the Indy 500 is one of the most iconic in motorsports. Yep. Completely agree. On the digital front, there's a huge opportunity for growth, particularly among younger fans who digest their sports in different ways. The IndyCar app has a strong adoption rate with this audience and would benefit from more resources to provide a better, more immersive experience with real-time data, customizable filters, so everyone can tailor their experience by following specific drivers, interviews, even race moments, even historic footage. I love the emphasis on history. History is so important. It helps people engage and learn and grow with the sport. It's important that we give the stars of the show, the drivers, the chance to shine too. One of the reasons behind the success of Netflix's Drive to Survive is that it lifted the lid off of the F1 drivers and enabled us to see the personalities under the helmets. Look at what NBC Sunday Night Football does for NFL fans. We shouldn't be afraid to take a page from their playbook. Agree. You should also do a good theme song like an NBC's NFL Sunday Night Football does. We should also do a lot more in the presentation at the track, whether that's the pre-race driver announcements, which, by the way, Big Machine Music City Grand Prix, Scott Borchetta, Diplo, they all did I thought that was way the best we've ever seen. Might have even been better than the Indy 500 intros, and it was pretty good. We can also learn a lot more from the presentation at the track, whether it's in the pre-race driver announcements or a much improved podium like we saw in Detroit. Many of our podiums remind me of when I grew up in karting. The current setup is really unacceptable given the stature of the racing and our drivers. So the podium thing, I do agree with, but I think this is one of the things that Zach hyper focuses on, and I don't think it's that deep. Like, you don't want it to look crappy. There were a couple of races this year that it looked crappy, but also I don't know if the podium celebration, you're never going to be able to outdo F1. So I would almost suggest moving away from a podium entirely and maybe just focusing on the winner of a race. That would be maybe my suggestion. Likewise, the teams need the freedom via their social media channels to bring fans closer to the action and capture new audiences with behind-the-scenes content that feels real and authentic. 100%. Completely agree. Every outfit on the grid should be allowed to leverage their social channels with a video-first experience. As a video content creator, I completely agree with this one. 100%. Cooking. You keep cooking, Zach. Bam! Pre- and post-race footage would amplify our voice and grow IndyCar's audience collectively. By offering more tailored experiences, we will engage fans in ways that will keep them coming back for more. We can do more to bring the sport's rich history to life for a digital audience. This is a chance to tell stories that resonate beyond race day. Yes. Yes. As a video content creator in the IndyCar space, that paragraph is so freaking important. So freaking important. Since 2017, when F1 was taken over by Liberty Media, there has been a huge effort in marketing the sport. They took a fresh, bold approach, and you can see the massive impact it's had, especially in America. We should not treat Formula One as a competitor. Oh, hang on a second. But a series we should embrace. If you're a passionate motorsport fan, then you're going to be engaged by all forms of racing. In my experience, motor racing fans love the sport as a whole. Okay. Formula One is a competitor, though. Like, objectively speaking, they are a competitor. They occupy the same market share. Yes, as a motorsport fan, what do I have on the desk? I've got all sorts of different models, right? I love it all. But if you're IndyCar, it is unacceptable that you are not the number one form of open wheel racing in your own country. Unacceptable. And unfortunately, that means that Formula One is your competitor. Now, is Zach Brown going to say that as a team owner in Formula One? No. But I think he is not correct on that one. The FIFA World Cup depends on North America. You'll see the MLS embracing it, working hard to capture that audience. I think we're missing the opportunity to do the same with Formula One fans. They like the speed, the thrill, the wheel-to-wheel action. So, I mean, I get that trying to outreach and make Formula One fans comfortable to come to IndyCar races, that's cool. And I do agree that in making it clear it's another form of motorsports to enjoy and not an alternative, I to a certain extent I agree with that. And yes, there is a sense online with specifically IndyCar fans that they always try to compare IndyCar to Formula One. I don't think he's wrong on that point, but I think if you're IndyCar and you don't treat Formula One like they're a competitor, and that they are beating you and that you have been beaten by them and then that is unacceptable, I think you've kind of lost the plot. So I disagree on that one. On the business side, I understand the desire for the newly developed charter system for IndyCar teams. This is the point where we're going to disagree a little bit. In my view, what's presented doesn't really move the dial. Well, I do agree with that point. We need a structure that aligns the teams with the growth of the series, so perhaps we should look at evolving the charter system into a true franchise model with a defined revenue sharing stream that ensures long-term viability for the competitors. Healthy teams mean better racing, and better racing means a better experience all around the Americas for IndyCar fans. The series could enhance the work done by its commercial marketing group by actively engaging external marketers. Agree with that. He's saying get out of the 465 mindset. If you don't know, there's a big highway that surrounds the Indianapolis area, and that's 465. And more often than not, if it's not happening in 465, sometimes it feels like IndyCar doesn't know it's happening. So, yes, if you go to outside folks who maybe have a different perspective, I've always thought that maybe that IndyCar should bring in someone with a baseball background. I think that you still have the sports background. You have a sport that is traditional, but I think that but also it would be someone who is not an auto racing person specifically. Now, you need an auto racing person to kind of say yes or no on things above this person, but I think if you had like a baseball person who was like a marketing executive who has experience in that sport, I think there would be some really good stuff. So I agree with that. We can be guilty of not seeing the forest for the trees, getting sponsors and outside experts to help with the ideation, I don't know that word actually, and provide fresh perspectives and innovative strategies that would help deliver dynamic audience campaigns and fan engagement opportunities to drive greater growth and visibility of the series. I believe the series would also benefit greatly from a technical working group focused on enhancing the sport's regulatory development and fostering collaboration between the teams, their engineers, and series officials. The work of such a group would ensure regulations are not only fair, but also promote cutting-edge technology and competitive balance. One area of focus for the group would be how the series amplifies the technology behind the developments. Currently, most, if not all, of the research and development projects are in areas invisible to the fans, but technology advances on the cars and pit equipment may create new, interesting storylines that draw attention from the fans and sponsors alike. Okay, here's a point that really needs to be made, because I think he's on the right track here. And I don't know if he's specifically saying would be to open up new opportunities for development on the cars, or if he's saying that they just need to start promoting some of the development on the cars more. But to me, one of the parts and one of the reasons that IndyCar, that IndyCar struggles to have people get interested in the series is that every technological development, every team immediately has access to, at least in terms of the actual races, which are what people care about. For example, we stopped talking about the hybrid 2 races in. Why? Because every team has the hybrid exactly the same on every single car. It is used in the exact same way on every single car. Every single driver uses the hybrid virtually identically. So it becomes completely pointless, completely moot to talk about. So from my perspective, if you want the technology to become a storyline, you have to open areas up for that technology to be developed by the teams, by the manufacturers, and yes, that means you're going to have haves and have-nots. How cool would it have been if some of the teams were allowed to use the hybrid or decided to use the hybrid, and some teams decided to not use the hybrid? I don't know. The group could also advise on testing cadence and assignments, ensuring greater parity for who's testing. I agree with this. There's a huge disparity in the big teams and the small teams in the amount of testing they get. And why? In order to drive the entire paddock forward, rather than just those perceived to have the most resources. Hybrid testing this past year is a good, obvious example of that. Completely agree. There was a huge testing inequity this year, and Zach's 100% right on that. The introduction of the hybrid power units was a welcome step in the right direction, even though its debut was slightly delayed. The fact that the new engines have been integrated into the sport with very few technical issues is a credit to IndyCar, Chevrolet, and Honda. The technology is an important step to retain road relevancy and appeal to manufacturers. Well, I'm glad the current manufacturers are appealed to it. Road relevancy only matters in sports car racing, and even then, I don't think it matters all that much because a Porsche 963 is cool whether it's road relevant or not, I believe. But here we go. So to me, I understand why he's saying that. Did the hybrid move the needle at all for anybody that's not named Chevrolet or Honda? No. The reality is there's no getting around the fact that our cars are outdated. We've been using the DW12 Dallara for a dozen years now, and given the additional weight of the hybrid systems, a new chassis is essential to make the cars nimbler and more drivable. Plans for a new race car are in motion, but it's critical we push forward quickly. The introduction of the hybrid was intended to modernize the marketing message and be current in today's more sustainable world. But a new car designed with modern technology and hybrid power will not only enhance performance, but also excite fans. We need to ensure that our car looks more current and performs faster than ever. Okay, so I do agree with Zach that one of the, if not priority number one, this needs to be in the top three. A new car has got, and I, again, in an alternate universe somewhere, somebody says, let's just make a formula. Open up the bidding to a few different chassis manufacturers and let's have Orica build an IndyCar to compete with Dallara. Let's have Ligier build an IndyCar to compete with Dallara. Would Ferrari like to come in and build a car? Would Porsche like to come in and build a car? Seems to be working in sports car racing. I don't know why it couldn't work. And even if you have to go to a BOP formula, I think it's better than the alternative, which is every car is the same. But regardless, if it is a spec car, we need to see a rendering and I said this last year, and we didn't see a rendering. We need to see a rendering of a car and a concrete plan that a new chassis is coming, and the target date is 2027 at the very earliest, or at the very latest. I mean, like, it's got to be done. Like, no racing series that is top level in the world has cars as old as IndyCar. And really, in the history of racing, you can go back to the 1930s and the 1940s. Post-World War II was one of the few times where race cars over 10 years old were regularly used in competition by top teams. And that was mainly because most of Europe had been bombed. Okay? They got to make the car. The cars have got to change. The cars have got to evolve. And it's a crucial part of auto racing. And if you don't understand that, I can't help you. We'll leave on a positive here. The future of IndyCar is bright, and we need to keep pushing forward strategically to focus on quality over quantity. Okay, never mind. We're not going to focus on a positive. This is something that Zach has brought up a few times, whether it's car counts or on-track competition. Look, man, Milwaukee was exciting because there were 27 cars out on the racetrack. If you try to do Formula One and you have 20 cars, you won't have enough lap traffic and it won't be exciting, and everyone will train around because they're all running the same speeds. Lap traffic and like 7 or 8 cars that are slow is good for racing. Sorry, completely wrong on this. Completely wrong on this. This is the highest form of single-seater racing in North America. That is true, 100%. Goes back to my point of saying if Formula One is beating you, you're in trouble. By improving the schedule, enhancing the fan experience, embracing new technology, strengthening the financial health of our teams, we ensure IndyCar reaches its full potential. I disagree with some of it. I agree with most of it. I appreciate that Zach wrote this article because it puts public pressure on the powers that be to make changes. And I think in this 6-month off season that we're about to experience, I think that we need to start making some of these changes. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. Subscribe for more. See you at the Deal 500 Club tomorrow at 8 p.m.